We're officially recording, and welcome to the Trailblazers Uncensored telecall with Lissa Pohl, talking about optimal terminology and what does that mean for us in the field in practice, and how do we implement the changes that the committee has come up with. But before we do that, as those of you who are regulars, and welcome those of you who are new, as we tend to do, I always like to start with a regulation minute. And it's just an opportunity for us to land and to join this space together. You're welcome wherever you are if you choose to, you're welcome to let your eyes gently close. You're welcome to let your eyes drop down to the computer screen in front of you, unfocused, soft eyes, a la Sally Swift. And just take a minute or two to check in with your breath. Check in with yourself and give yourself a chance to land here. For the next little bit, nowhere to go, nothing to do except be here. I'm going to add a sound that I hope you guys can hear. Sound I find particularly regulating. And if you're able to hear it, or if you're not, it's that sound of you've just put hay out and the herd is munching away. A sound that for me indicates a job done. And happy horses. And just take a minute or two to enjoy the horse breaths. And maybe let out a nice big sigh of your own. And then as you feel ready, and as you choose to, you're welcome, if your eyes have been closed, to blink them back open. If they've been cast down, bring them back up to the screen. And take a moment to make eye contact with the faces on your Hollywood squares that are choosing to be visible. I'll tell you what, my world changed when I found hide self view in Zoom. I find that I did not sit through meetings pre-pandemic staring at myself, and lo and behold, what do I do on Zoom? I'm like, gosh, I don't remember that being, So hide self view is an option for those who may be self-conscious. It's in the 3 dots next to your name, and you can hide self view. So welcome one and all. If you prefer the speaker view to the Hollywood Squares view, that's in your upper right-hand corner under view, and you can choose speaker as opposed to Hollywood Squares or Brady Bunch. And welcome one and all. I hope that were people able to hear the audio? I wasn't quite sure that was going to work. Awesome. Yeah, I love that sound at end of day, because it means the day is done and horses are fed, and that means that we can now have dinner. So today's guest is, before I forget, we do not have any new COVID protocols enacted at our barn. So usually we go through in these calls, we have a regulation minute, and then we talk about if we've made any adjustments due to the current status of the pandemic. They have opened up in our state a little bit, some of the restrictions. we're still acting as if the restrictions are 100% in place until all of our staff is completely vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. So we have changed very, very little and are still operating at in the same manner that we were, say, probably as of June. We're operating under the same principles, but masks and disinfecting everything. In fact, I was just up top at the office yesterday and noticed that we've become such frequent sprayers of disinfectant on all of our surfaces in our bathroom that all of our surfaces are starting to be eaten away by the disinfectant. So we're going to need to replace everything. The handles on the toilet and on the door are starting to chip away from the detergent, are actually the disinfectant that we've been spraying everything with. So that's going on our checklist of things to do. But most important is that we have Lissa Pohl with us here. And Lissa and I met way, way back, I'm going to say 10 years ago, at least, Lissa, in California. We met for the first time.
2004, I believe.
Oh, wow. So even longer ago than that. So let me introduce Lissa, and then I'll tell my story about Lissa, and then we'll hear about optimal terminology. So Lissa Pohl is the Chief Engagement Officer at ENQ Coaching. And the engagement quotient is the name of kind of what she's up to these days. So she's a global expert in somatic intelligence and engagement, which sounds really exciting and means we're going to have you come back and talk about that some other time. Her work embraces several innovative learning modalities, including EAL, Lights On Leadership Coaching, the Leadership Circle 360 profile to provide C-suite leadership, leaders the heightened perceptual awareness and feedback they need to fully engage, inspire, and lead their organizations. Lissa holds a master's degree in transformational leadership education development and is an E3A, Equine Experiential Education Association master trainer, and has served on their board from 2012 to 2018. She comes to us having freshly retired from the University of Kentucky, where she conducted pioneering research in the effectiveness of equine guided leadership education to increase emotional intelligence for healthcare professionals, who would need that in this day and age, right? She participated in the Equine Assisted Services Terminology Summit, which is what we're here to talk about today, and has presented at leadership conferences worldwide on embodying leadership competencies, a phrase that I love. And again, like I said, we'll have to have Lissa back on to talk more about that. Her clients include the Qatar Foundation, Qatar DR, HEC Paris Executive Leadership Development, Johnson & Johnson, bless them, and University of Kentucky Healthcare and Applebee's Restaurant. So Lissa has been around the block. She has plenty of bona fides, and she and I connected initially about almost precisely this subject way back when in California, when Ariana Strozzi had myself and Tracy Weber, who is also on this call, and Lissa and Lynn Thomas, and whomever it was that was then in a position of leadership at PATH, whose name escapes me. Gosh, Lissa, do you remember who that was?
Is it Barbara?
Tracy, do you remember? Yeah. Who knows? And Ariana was our guest. I think June Gunter may have even been there as well.
Yeah. Mickey
DiGiacomo. You're right.
Yeah. There. Mm-hmm.
So we all came together around a very similar idea of how do we communicate who we are and what we do to the public, and how do we do that in a way that's consistent, that that recognizes the differences of who we are and what we do. And this, lo and behold, however many years later, the optimal terminology document. So Lissa, welcome. And thank you so much for taking time with us today. More history you'd like to give us on, because I fell out of connection with the committee, and tell us about how it came about and how long it took to get the optimal terminology document delivered.
Yeah. Well, if you can start the PowerPoint, I go through all of that, kind of how the sort of the birth of the whole idea. So,
all right. Here we go.
We'll run right through it. Yeah. So back, so what we're here to talk about today, or I'm to talk and then you guys can ask me questions later, is this unifying term, equine assisted services. And we're looking at that hyphen too. So we're looking at trying to make it real consistent throughout. So EAS, and that is plural for a reason, and I'll tell you why in a minute. So go ahead. Yeah, there you go. So the paper that was the result of about almost 3 years of work. And I entered this in July of 2019 is when I entered the mix at the summit. And I'll show you that in the next slide. But the paper, this is what the name of the paper is that got published back in November after almost 3 years of really hard work by quite a number of people. And like it says, it is a consensus document. And it was a really great process. It's one of the best consensus building processes I've ever been experienced, actually. And it was really a phenomenal experience. And I think what we came up with was really a synthesis of everybody's time, effort, deliberation, debate, all of that kind of came to fruition when we got this paper published. So go to the next one real quick. Okay, so some of the authors on the paper, and I am one of them, but Wendy Wood from CSU, and she's actually the director of development or something at the Temple Grandin Center at CSU in Fort Collins, Colorado. She was actually the technical writer. We all wrote the paper together, and then Wendy put it into sort of peer-reviewed journal-ese, because that's what she does for a living. And then Kathy Alm, CEO of PATH, was part of our process in the work group. Joanne Benjamin, who was is a physical therapist, and she was kind of there through American Hippotherapy Association. Of course, Lynn Thomas with EGALA, Debbie Anderson, Strides to Success in near Indianapolis. And, you know, Debbie is PATH certified and also has done EGALA and also is a founder, one of the founding members of E3A. And then, of course, I was with University of Kentucky at the time we were writing this, and I've been with E3A. I got my first certification back in 2010, and then went to level 2 in 2012, and then became a master trainer probably about 5 years ago. And then Michelle Kane is also a certified PATH international trainer, and she's out of Denver as well. And so she kind of brought a veteran's perspective because she is a veteran herself. So next. So this is kind of steps you through all the, you know, where we started and where we went. So before I even arrived on the scene, which was here in the summit group, Kathy got together several people, everyone in the working group except I believe Debbie and myself got together and said, we need to do something around terminology. They got a fund from the Robert Woodward Foundation. And I don't know if you remember Robert Woodward, but he was paralyzed he was a journalist in Iraq, and he was paralyzed, and his recovery was through working with horses. So he was very interested in this. So they funded this whole project to help us clarify terminology in this field so that more people, can locate it, research it, fund it even more, get insurance. So they felt strong enough that they wanted to fund this whole project of getting to some unifying and optimal terminology in this field. So that started about 1.5 years before we get to the summit. But before then, they sent out, the working group developed a survey. We've all been surveyed many, many times before, I think by different organizations in equine assisted services. And you might have even received one and filled it out as part of this project. But they sent out several thousand surveys, and they got back quite a few surveys, enough that it was statistically valid. And so we took that information, and then we held a summit, and that's where about 17 of us came to Denver. And it wasn't, and I want to be real clear about this, we were asked and invited to the summit, not because we represented any one philosophy, certification, or methodology. We were asked because of some of our experience in the areas that we work in. So it wasn't like there was a path representation or an e-gala, even though those people were there, or I wasn't there for E3A to represent E3A. I was there to represent an equine assisted learning perspective, much as like Nina Elkhorn, is it Elkhorn?
Echolm Fry.
Elkhorn, okay. She was there to really represent, equine assisted psychotherapy, or we're going to be calling it something else too, where we're going to try and recommend calling it something else here by the end of this today. So there was a bunch of us. We spent 2.5 days in a room, and we came up with the very first draft of this paper. We wanted to get all of our ideas. And like I say, it was really well done. It was facilitated by some really phenomenal facilitators for a group of people. We had the stakeholders, where we had a couple of people who were consumers, whose children were working with horses for a variety of different mental health and or physical challenges. We had EAL, so the room was full of all sorts of different, very strong-minded, bright, brilliant people. And, but we came out with something that we could then work on. So then the work group, which consisted of the authors that you just saw, continued to refine that for about 1.5 years. And we met, probably bi-weekly for about 1.5 years to just hammer this back, take it, send it back, get more feedback from the summit people, send it back out even a little bit farther to some of the bigger stakeholders, which was to, get feedback, come back, refine a little bit more, and then finally sending it back out to get approval up here by a variety of boards and directors. And so all this information, if you want to know who that was, is in the paper. So this is really an overview of kind of what the process. And then we published the paper in November, like I said. So move into the next slide, thanks. And so what it boiled down to after we kind of looked, we kind of broke into groups at the summit and said, what are the big buckets? And we spent a lot of time on this, the equine assisted services, like the definition, and went back and around from what we were coming off of was EAAT, equine assisted activities and therapies. And we felt that was very confusing because it didn't really represent equine assisted learning and activities. I mean, it was just, there was kind of a jumble in that acronym that we've been using for quite a while as sort of an umbrella for all the different types of services that people do with horses. So we went around and around, and not everyone was super happy around equine assisted services, but this is where we're at right now. And we feel like it represents the 3 areas or disciplines that feed into that. So therapy comes down to when you incorporate horses, you've got counseling, occupational therapy, physical therapy, psychotherapy, speech language pathology, as well as other types of licensed professional therapists can use this modality of incorporating horses to benefit people. in what they're doing there. Then, oh, that got a little moved over in the translation here.
It did, yeah. Unfortunately, I have Keynote, and so I
Oh,
translated
okay,
it
yeah,
to a
that
PowerPoint.
happens a lot. Yeah, no problem. I think we can still read it. Thanks. So then there's the learning kind of funnel, and under learning, we have equine assisted learning in education, equine assisted learning in personal development, and equine assisted learning in organizations. And Debbie and I were working with a couple of others on that while the therapists were working on their definitions and trying to work that out. And we did ours and we got ours done pretty quickly, and we felt really happy because we really liked equine assisted learning. So there wasn't a huge change in that. And we chose equine assisted learning as the preferred term over equine facilitated learning, only because the two terms are fairly equally interchangeable, but if you Google, you will get way more Google hits on equine assisted learning. So if you do searches, you're going to find equine assisted learning way more often than equine facilitated learning. So that's why we landed on equine assisted learning under that bucket. And then horsemanship is the other sort of funnel that underneath that we have adaptive equestrian sport, adaptive riding, or therapeutic riding. Those are both very interchangeable. We found in the survey that people use them almost equally, 50-50, and that there wasn't really a preference for adaptive riding or therapeutic riding, even though the people who use that do differentiate a little bit about what their goal is with their client. Then you have driving, and then interactive vaulting. So let me see. I think I want to make sure that I have covered that slide. Hold on, I got a couple notes here. So yeah, under therapy, or the healthcare encompasses medical and behavioral health, right? There are 5 licensed professionals. So we're really kind of distinguishing these different buckets by the therapy really needs to be performed by licensed professionals. For liability purposes, for insurance purposes, all those kind of things. The learning, of course, you don't have to be licensed to do learning, but we also encourage everybody under learning to be certified and have an area of expertise in one of those 3: education, personal development, and or in organizations, corporate leadership. Those kind of things fall under that one. And then equine assisted services is not a standalone term. This is an important thing to understand when you are creating your own materials for use to market. Equine assisted services, and you say, I do equine assisted services, it's not like a one singular service. Equine assisted services describes any one of these 12 types of services that incorporate horses. So it's always going to be used in the plural. You could talk about an equine assisted service and then point to, and it happens to be equine assisted personal development. But it's not like EAAT where you see, well, we do EAAT. That used to be used in that context, which kind of said, well, therapies and activities, and kind of was that place where we just kind of put everything into. So yeah, let's move ahead. Thanks. So therapy, as I said before, counseling, occupational therapy, they reference the services that are delivered by licensed therapy professionals within the scope of their practice. And they may incorporate horses, and they address medical, cognitive, or behavioral health conditions as part of the individualized plan of care. Then we really felt that you need to make this stand alone, and this probably differed the most. So we went away from equine assisted as the descriptor before any of these services. So for instance, equine assisted psychotherapy is not a term that we're gonna recommend using, or, and there's at the end we have slide that discontinued terms. But what it is if we can go therapy first language, so equine, psychotherapy incorporating horses, occupational therapy incorporating equine movement, those kind of things, those examples are going to help us legitimize therapy when we incorporate horses. And the reasons for that was because there are insurance billing challenges that come up when we call it something else, because there is no category under therapy when you're billing for therapy hours as a psychotherapist or a physical therapist. There's no way you bill under your discipline, and then the horses are incorporated into that, right? So you describe what that is, but only after the therapy comes first. So go to the next slide and show you a couple of.
Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty, so
Okay.
I apologize. I'm not having.
You want me to pull it up? I can pull mine up instead.
You can try. My screen has frozen.
Okay, let me see if I can get mine. Is everybody else maybe thumbs up or unmute? You having problems? Let me get to this, and I will share my slide. Hold on. I will go to here and share my screen.
Yeah, I think when you share, it should kick mine out, but it's just locked up my computer entirely. So hopefully there are still other people on the call, because my computer has decided that it doesn't like anything that I'm doing, which
it says there's still 18 participants, so
good.
Hopefully we're still on here. Okay,
Awesome.
No, I think we are. Yeah, hold on just a second. Let me get into the slideshow. All right, welcome on here. Okay, can someone unmute, and do you see the new slideshow? Can someone just give us some feedback about that?
So actually, Lissa, you'll need to share. So you need to go to the bottom and hit share screen.
I did.
I can see it.
Oh, good. I'm glad y'all can. I can't. Oh,
You're the problem there, Sharon.
I am. Well, what a shock, right? I may. While Lissa, you've got a co-host, I may try and log back in and join you guys in a minute. It won't affect the recording. It shouldn't affect you since you're a co-host.
Okay,
and I'll be back in a second, guys.
Perfect. Okay, so we're on. We're doing great here. I'm just going to move this up there and kind of out of the way. All right. So let me see. Let me go on to here. So we're talking about there. There we go. So a bad place to put that. Let's put it down here. All right. So some examples of therapy first language would be physical therapy using equine movement, psychotherapy incorporating horses, or something like occupational therapy in an equine environment, because sometimes you don't even get on the horse or even touch the horse. It might be that this person comes out to the barn and does a number of different things under the guidance of an occupational therapist. So right now, I'm going to open it up right now, because this is a lot to take in. And I know that you probably are putting some, I can't see my chat here anyway. I don't think, my chat is over there. If someone has a burning question about anything that I've set up to now, unmute and ask me, because I'd be happy to answer it. Anybody got a question? If not, we'll keep going. It's the 10-second rule. Right?
I do.
Oh, okay. Who's this?
I do. Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
I'm just curious. Hi, and thanks for being here. I'm curious, because I imagine you did, but I just for clarification, look at like art therapy. Does art therapy follow this same type of language? Where's therapy first in order to get reimbursed?
You know, I don't know. You're not talking about art therapy with horses. You're just looking at art therapy separately.
No, I'm just general other things, other modalities, you know, other that would be similar as far as they have a special approach.
Yeah, well, I'm not a therapist, so I wouldn't necessarily know if there's a a box to check when you are billing for art therapy. So I wouldn't necessarily know the answer to that, Tracy. Would anyone else?
Shannon, you look like you
Yeah.
want to answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. So yeah, in general, as a therapist, and this is the non-therapist explaining, but I've been doing it long enough, that art therapy is the intervention. It is not there's no checkbox. There's no checkbox
Right.
for play therapy. There's no checkbox for art therapy or checkbox for animal assisted therapy. The
Thank
goals, the treatment goals are what matter, and how we get to the treatment goals are not necessarily reported. Does that answer the question? I kind of came in halfway. Does that
Yeah,
answer
very good. No, that was my assumption, is why this makes sense, and also wanted to track it onto what's the common language, which is not therapy using art, right?
Right.
So while this, I just wanted to parallel.
Right.
Excellent.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tracy, for that question. Yeah, so the therapists that were at the summit were really clear that this was an important distinction to make, instead of calling it equine assisted therapy or equine therapy, because equine therapy is actually therapy for equines, not people. So we're going to have to kind of re-look at some of the discontinued language that we see. And the reason, and I forgot to do a slide. Now that I've done this, I'll probably include a slide. Really, they're stakeholders. And if you are someone looking into equine assisted services, you don't know anything about them, and you're taking a look down into this barrel full of all sorts of different things, how do you know what to look for if it isn't really clearly spelled out for you? So the stakeholders are the consumers, the buyers of the product. Stakeholders were researchers who were trying to legitimize this by being able to find research or write research that gets really specific about that. So researchers need really clear terminology so that they can move the field forward. And then also insurance providers for the services, because there's been instances where people who aren't therapists, licensed registered therapists, who are billing for therapy with horses, and it isn't covered or isn't clear how it's being utilized, and therefore they don't get covered, or the insurance company says we're not going to cover any of this because it's too confusing. So the stakeholders, really, it's driven by the stakeholders. If you were someone who didn't know anything about horses helping humans on any level, where do I go? So being able to go therapy language first, therapy first language, really helps people who need those kind of services find them, and also find someone, hopefully, who through better research has a insurance company that's looked for the research and can find the common words, because there's lots of research out there, but they're all using different terms about what they're doing. Therefore, it's really hard for anyone to find credible research such that they can make their decisions as an insurance company to fund these types of services. So it's really important from all sorts of different stakeholder perspectives that we get clear on the optimal terminology for the field of equine assisted services.
And Lissa, I'm going to jump in here on this, because this is definitely kind of where I really step in on this and need clarification. Someone has written in is there another word for psychotherapy that has less stigma? I believe somewhere in the document I remember walking away with counseling with horses as the kind of optimal phrase, because that is therapy first, but it leads with the idea of counseling as opposed to psychotherapy. Am I mistaken in walking away with that assumption?
No, these are just, if you are a social worker, and a clinical licensed social worker who's doing work with horses, you would just say, yeah, clinical social work incorporating horses for, behavior, whatever it might be. So these were just some of the examples, the kind of the different buckets were that physical therapy or occupational, everything that kind of falls under hippotherapy, which is another term that is very problematic.
Right.
Because hippotherapy is not a therapy in and of itself. It's a description of different types of interventions working with horses that address physical challenges for different people.
Right. And one of the other comments, just so that you're aware, Karen has chimed in with the use of psychotherapy as the all-encompassing feels problematic. And I think that's what you're pointing to, is that it definitely is problematic, and it was for the working group and the committee, but it kind of ended up between psychotherapy and counseling ended up being our best option. Is that what I might take away?
Yes, and we're totally aware that as new therapies come onto the scene, and those practitioners and those licensed therapists, whatever type of therapy they are doing, and they're incorporating horses into it. So yeah, there's counseling, there's psychotherapy, there might be behavior or mental health. You might be able to say mental health services or mental health intervention incorporating horses, those kind of things. But what the intervention is comes first, and then the horses are there as the way it is happening.
Yeah. And I as a someone who's been in the field and has bumped up against problems in this regard for many, many years, I'm delighted to see whatever term we use leading with that first, because there's so many folks running around saying I do equine assisted therapy, and they don't have a therapist anywhere in sight. And I think that is what is the most difficult and challenging for consumers to understand, is that just because it has the word therapy in the title of the organization or on the website doesn't mean it's therapy. And that is a huge educational gap that I think we're up against in the field, and that this therapy first language will help us address. And so I appreciate the effort towards it, because the number of times I talk to new programs and say, well, if you don't have a therapist in the arena, it's not therapy. So call it something else.
Right, exactly. And it's not that working with horses on any level isn't therapeutic. I mean, equine assisted learning can be very therapeutic, just like therapeutic writing, but therapeutic is not therapy. So putting therapy first language out there also really legitimizes these services that we offer with our horses. And so I think it really also might attract more people to come into this, young professionals, because they can see themselves in it. But if you're a young professional looking for what can I do with my horse and that kind of thing, they're not going to see that they can actually even do this work, because the equine assisted therapy doesn't always make a whole lot of sense, or equine therapy. Those kind of things are really muddy terms, and they don't even make sense if you really think about them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to go on to there. Here we go. All right, so under learning, like I said, we have equine assisted learning and education. So this might be where you have a school program at your facility where it could be at-risk youth coming, and you can still do learning. And here again, there's that blurry line, equine assisted learning. We were really talked about those blurry lines between therapy and learning, and understanding what the differences are. So those doing equine assisted learning really need to be clear about the differences of facilitating learning versus facilitating therapy. because that can create a huge liability when you're doing this work. And if something happens, then it's not just a liability for you and your facility, it's a liability for the whole field of equine assisted services. So we really want to be clear what's learning and how's that facilitated differently than therapy. So we encourage everybody to get certified in facilitating learning versus therapy. And it is very quite different. I don't do therapy at all because I don't have a background in therapy. So if I worked even with at-risk youth or veterans with PTSD, then I would definitely want a therapist on my team, just so that we have those bases covered. You can do learning with veterans very easily, but you really have to know how to keep everybody safe and keep it in the learning realm and not go into therapy. So there's a lot there. But in education, so school programs might be 4-H, anything with youth. In schools, it can even go into programs that might be found in different colleges or universities in their equine programs. Some colleges and universities have them. So education is that kind of big bucket there. Equine assisted learning in organizations would include team building, leadership, emotional intelligence, anything that someone might be doing when they are coaching executives, teams, that falls under that organizations. And then equine assisted learning, and sorry, that strip is at the bottom, in personal development. And so personal development, you might have things that are more like, you might have healing with horses there, Reiki, meditation, yoga. It also might just be personal awareness and coaching with horses, life coaching with horses. So that personal development is a little bit different, again, than organizational context under equine assisted learning. Any questions?
Yeah, Lissa, we've had a couple come up in the chat box, and I'll start with the one that is most connected to what we're talking about now. I know that I have encountered lots of folks that are life coaches or other more equine assisted learning folks using the term therapeutic. Was there any kind of a sense, or I personally am completely against using even the term therapeutic, because I think it muddies the waters, and I understand lots of distinctions there. But was there any sort of consensus around the use of the term therapeutic for EAL and horsemanship?
We're really, we're really, well, in the horsemanship, that's a whole nother, we'll get to that one.
Yeah.
But no, within equine assisted learning, we're really clear that it's not therapy, and we totally avoid the words therapeutic
and therapy
and therapy when we're describing this. But when I tell people I teach leadership with horses, they go, "Oh, it's like that. It's equine assisted therapy, like therapy with horses." Like, no, but see, that is just exactly what we're up against, is because most people think of when someone is working with horses, because all they've seen on the TV is working with veterans or kids with autism,
cerebral palsy, stroke,
cerebral palsy, or therapeutic horsemanship, that too as well. So this is why it's so needed, so the buying public can understand that there are really distinct ways in which we incorporate horses to benefit humans.
Yeah. And so I think the added complication is the PATH renaming of itself, Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship, becomes really muddy and confusing. Another great question that came up back when we were having the therapist discussion was, what was the conversation around regarding recreational therapists? Did that come up in your work?
Well, here again, if they're licensed recreational therapists and they're providing a recreational therapy, then absolutely. So it would be, it might be recreational therapy in a horse environment, or, in an equine environment, something like that. Um, we're not mandating what people have to call their own specific therapy.
Right.
We're really encouraging people to put therapy first language in, if it's therapy.
Right. So in that regard, we would lead with recreation therapy with horses.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then Kelly had another observation. Perhaps the complication arises from personal growth being a concept that people see as very similar to therapy. Yeah, I think you're right, Kelly. I think that there's been this collusion, this falling inward, that these are the same. And that is, I think, problematic throughout the industry, is that there are coaches who are in territory that they are ill-equipped to be in. There are, therapists who are doing coaching and sometimes getting into muddy territory there that blessedly they've got lots of support for around ethics and peer supervision to help with that. But I agree. I think that that's part of why we are so confused. And if we are confused, imagine how our consumers feel, which is super, I liken it to 30 years ago. If I said I was a coach, y'all would ask me football or baseball, right? Now I say I'm a coach, and people have, they now know that term might mean this whole other host of things. And that's kind of, I think, where we are with the equine therapy, equine assisted learning, therapy with horses. That's where we are right now, is that we have this huge kind of hump to get over so that consumers actually understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit it on the nose there. We are equine assisted services as an industry or a field is right where coaching was about 20 years ago. Professional coaches other than sports coaches, right?
And Lissa, in the interest of time, let's go ahead to your last slide about the horsemanship, and then Inger, we'll come back to your question about if you're experiencing, we'll come back to your question before we wrap. And just to warn everyone, it's such a rich conversation. I'm likely to go over by 10 minutes, if not a tad longer. Lissa, are you able to stay with us?
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that.
Okay, all right. So, and everyone will get the recording in case you have a client and you need to sign off. So take it away, Lissa.
So horsemanship, this was a little bit more sticky. Like I said, the EAL was a lot easier to get through. We were done, one and done in a day, and then we were still going around. So therapeutic riding and adaptive riding were seen as pretty much similar in that survey. Therapeutic riding, we went around and around on this because of the word therapeutic being synonymous with therapy. However, because PATH has sort of the market on certifying therapeutic riding instructors, along with like the Chef Institute and other places do therapeutic riding. And then there's hippotherapy, which is, a therapy and not therapeutic horsemanship. So this one was a little muddy as well, but if we can be really clear in our descriptions, if we're offering therapeutic riding or adaptive riding, if you want to be really clear, then adaptive riding makes completely sense. You're taking someone who has some maybe form of disability and teaching them how to ride horses. You're giving them horsemanship. Is it therapeutic? Can they get better balance? Can they do, does it benefit them? Yes, absolutely. Adaptive riding also goes down to that equestrian sports. There's many people who compete. So we wanted to have equestrian sports in there too, but it is not therapy. These are athletes who are the equestrian application is adaptive so that these people can ride horses, and that's the way they compete, and that's their way of being a competitor. And then there's the driving as well. So, and interactive vaulting, people use that sometimes in therapy for all sorts of different things, but that might be a combination. But interactive vaulting is really about giving those skill sets to people who might need or want to do vaulting on a horse. Does that make sense? It's kind of, let me see if I can.
Well, it sounds like, just kind of as a top level overview, equine assisted learning feels pretty complete. It has the distinctions in it, that it, educational, personal development, professional development. That feels pretty good. I think it's the therapy first and this horsemanship that is still quite squishy, and will take the field a while to get their arms around. Some good questions have come up about the path, the Professional Association of Therapeutic Riding, Therapeutic Horsemanship, excuse me. And just so you guys know, it is my intention to have a representative of PATH come on and talk about their experience of this, and hopefully other professionals in the different orgs that are out there. PATH does have a lot on their website right now about optimal terminology and about what it means for their programs going forward. So I'll share some of those resources, or at least some of those links with y'all, so that you can get studied up on kind of what's out there right now, and we can start the conversation then at a different point. They're really great questions, and they're not a lot of easy answers. And that is a testament to how difficult the whole working group and the summit must have been, and good, clean, solid facilitation was so necessary. We even encountered that in California 10 plus years ago. We're all wanting to move the field forward. We're all, as Lissa so kindly said, we're all strong-minded, focused people trying to do right for our clients and our field. And it's hurting cats. There's a lot of different opinions. So I think these 3 buckets are really helpful. And let's close, or at least close the presentation with these recommendations that you've got up on the screen now for discontinuation. So chat with us a little bit about this, Lissa.
Yeah, so it's really important. So if you were using any of these terms, then you might want to look at the paper, read it through thoroughly, and understand, rewrite. And so we understand that it's going to take time for these changes to happen. For any particular facility, there's going to have to be consensus at each facility to change the way you've been marketing yourself, perhaps over the years. But once you educate your consumers and your stakeholders, they're going to get it, and they're going to want to support some of these changes. So equine therapy really it's therapy for equines. And this one is, we see it in the most recently published article on PTSD coming out of the Warhorse project. And it's great research, and yet they're calling it equine therapy. So it's like people are, well, what? It really can be confusing. Equine assisted activities and therapies, so the EAAT, no longer, we don't want to use that anymore. Equine assisted therapy, because here again, what kind of therapy? All right. Equestrian therapy, that might be moving more towards that therapeutic horsemanship. Hippotherapist, here again, hippotherapy refers to different types of therapies that aren't psychological therapies. Hippotherapy program, horse therapy, again, we're talking about therapy for horses, and therapy riding. So we're looking at adaptive riding or therapeutic riding at that point. So those are the terms that we really emphasized as wanting to discontinue, so that we can unmuddy the waters, clarify terms for all stakeholders that are out there. So that's kind of it.
Well, and what I want to encourage folks to do is, if you haven't already and you want to hold some of these thoughts, you can save the chat, because there's been a lively discussion going on in chat with some great ideas. So you hit the 3 buttons down at the bottom, the 3 little dots. If you click on that, then it'll give you the opportunity to save chat. And if for whatever reason it doesn't for you, we can make the chat available. And so go ahead and stop your share, and Lissa, and that way we can see each other. And
There we go.
awesome, and we can get the information, the chat box over on the side. So one question that Inger had that I promised that we'd circle back to, because I don't think we're going to get to everything today. Shockingly, in an hour, I don't think we're going to cover all this territory. Inger was asking about pushback and the areas in which you're receiving kind of the most pushback or lack of buy-in, which of course is nigh impossible to have 100% buy-in.
Right.
Where's the pockets that you're
so when in that last part of the writing of the paper, we wrote the paper, we said this is what we're going to publish, and we sent it back out to, actually let me stop, I think I have it on. I want to do a gallery, there we go, then I can see everybody, there we go. So when we sent it back out to all the different boards, not only those boards and organizations that were represented in the mix of people who were at the summit, but out to different horsemanship boards. I think we sent it out to the American Quarter Horse. It's all in that paper. I don't have them memorized, but we had pushback from the American Hippo Association. We worked and they loved the clarification of the terms, but they didn't like equine assisted services as the umbrella term. And we couldn't really quite understand why. Their reasoning wasn't, we couldn't quite get to that. So they did not sign on to the overall term of equine assisted services, but they did love the clarity of the definitions around the therapies, the different therapies, and using therapy first language, separating out equine assisted learning and horsemanship. So they were all for most of it, but they couldn't buy the overarching equine assisted services as a descriptor of the field. Is interesting. And then we're not quite sure, EGALA did not, the board, EGALA board did not sign on to the paper either. And not quite sure, and you probably all know there's been a big disruption within EGALA with Lynn Thomas. And so Lynn Thomas, like I said, she wasn't there representing EGALA in the work group or at the summit. She was there representing psychotherapists and a different model than maybe a more strict mental health model, such as Nina might have. So we got reasoning back, but we couldn't quite understand what their argument was about that. And without going into that email and the reasoning, you can probably find that out, or even ask the EGALA board to send you why they didn't, because I'm sure they would share that with you. And I think it's difficult to change. I mean, change is really hard for all of us. And when you've been using certain terms, equine assisted psychotherapy, for so long, we even almost put in the paper, but then we took it out again because we think that equine assisted psychotherapy is kind of usable, but we didn't put it in the paper because we really want to start moving people towards that therapy first language. So I think there's going to be individual pushback, but overall we had a lot. We had the majority of the boards were just thrilled that this work has been done. And we write in the paper that this is a work in process. We understand, but you have to start somewhere. You have to put a stake in the ground and say, we're going to move forward and we're going to get clear so that more people can find this work and benefit from the work with the horses, basically.
Yeah, and I'll say that since I read the paper, I've been inserting counseling with horses more and more, and catching and not, there's not been this wholesale change in everything. I haven't gone through the website with a fine tooth comb and caught every instance of it, but I've been kind of having counseling with horses in my mouth and holding it, and I'm liking it more and more the more I use it, because I think it is able to explain the difference more quickly and readily to folks than equine assisted therapy, which just is so broad as to be almost of no use whatsoever.
Right.
Once you get in this field. Now, outside the field, it may have certain meaning to Joe Q public, but it by and large has the wrong meaning, and it's so broad as to be unhelpful. So
good, that's a great point. Thanks, Shannon. Yeah. Any other questions? Vernon, I'm fine to be here for a while.
And know as well, like I said, my hope is to have someone from PATH come on and speak about the work that, their response and how they're moving forward, and have some folks, maybe we'll have some folks from AGALA come on and talk not only about the terminology, but talk about the shifts. And I love your term disruptions. That's a very gracious way to talk about something that has been very difficult for the field. And we also have Lynn Thomas and the folks over at Arches scheduled to maybe come on and talk to us about what they're up to and where they're headed. So one thing, if you gather nothing else from today's call, it's that my goal is to be non-denominational. I have my preferences, I have my druthers, but I think that in the spirit of a great, great man who is no longer with us, Paul Smith, it is education. We all come together, we share our ideas, we all have different opinions, and we have different answers because we ask different questions, right? My questions and Tracy's questions and Monica's questions are not the same. So therefore, I'm going to have different answers. So every time I have an opportunity to bring up Paul Smith and his legacy, I do. And this seemed like a great moment to mention that we don't need to be encamped. We need to work together. And I think the work that you've done, Lissa, is driving us in that direction. And I'm all verklempt just even talking about it. So.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, from the bottom of my heart, it was such an honor to work with this group of individuals. We respected everybody's perspective. That's why we were able to get to this paper, because I think for the first time, as hard as we tried, Tracy and Shannon, how many years ago at the forum or whatever we were calling it, people were still, it was the egos are involved. There was no ego in this at all. It was brilliant. I was so happy for our work, and because I think we all can play in the field however we want to, and the more who can come in, the better, but we have to have clarity around that from all those different stakeholders so that we can really legitimize equine assisted services across the board. Yeah.
And if it's in service of ourselves and our egos, we are absolutely missing the boat. The ones that we need to be uber concerned with is our clients being able to find the service that suits them. And I think that is sometimes missed in all the camping and device, those sorts of things. Karen had one more question. Do we know what the PATH International expectations are for? Karen, we'll get to that next time. I will share some links. PATH does have links on their current website about how they want to roll out changes in websites and literature. So I don't think there's a hard deadline, but they have a rollout procedure that they're operating under. And hopefully, if we're lucky, we'll be able to have Kathy come on and talk about that at a future call. So stand by. I'll include those links of the things that I found and in the follow-up email with the recording, the terminology doc, and the slides. And so Nicole has asked, how frequently are these calls? When do you expect you'll have follow-up calls about this topic? So we tend to do these calls once a month. And when we have lots and lots of stuff to talk about, in addition to what was covered in the overarching in the once a month, we'll try and schedule it within the next month. It would be my hope. If we're lucky, we'll hope to have Kathy on, if she's able, in the next month and a half. Because while this is fresh and while it's current in our minds, I think it would serve all of us to continue this discussion. So it may show up separate from Trailblazers because we tend to try and do those once a month for free. But yes, my goal is to move forward quickly. I will say our next guest in the month of April is we're going to have Veronica Lack and Elizabeth McCorvey back to continue talking about more than a statement. More than a statement was kind of our response, my response, Trailblazers' response to the death of George Floyd and the rise of diversity and inclusion. What do we do beyond making a statement that lack of diversity and lack of inclusion is bad? So great, we got a statement, and now what? There's a lot more work to be done. What else can we be doing? So Elizabeth and Veronica and I are going to talk April 12th at 2 o'clock about More Than a Statement continued. And we'll continue to, if you're on our list, or when you get my email with the follow-up, join our mailing list, and we'll make sure to notify you of these calls and the follow-on calls to today's call in particular about this terminology. So.
Right. And if you have any questions for me about anything, yeah, just, reach out. My email is on there, and I will send the slides.
Okay, we'll get the slides to you. We'll get her email to you. We'll get everything. If I forget anything, because I am the queen of, I promise I'll send it, and then I forget when I go to send the email. If I forget something, I trust someone will let me know, and I'll send a follow-up email with whatever it is I forgot to put in there. So
well,
you guys
have having me, Shannon. It was it was nice to see you again and see a few familiar faces out here. So thank you so much.
Indeed. And thank you so much for taking time. And at some point, we're going to have to get you scheduled to have conversation about what you're up to these days. It sounds really, really interesting. So, all right, you guys, everybody have a great rest of your Monday. Have a lovely week. Hopefully no pipes freeze and, the floods stop and all the things that have been going on. We'll keep on keeping on and getting vaccinated and getting back out there. So be safe, be well.